Well, welcome human biology class. We're going to begin a new topic today, that is the musculoskeletal system. We're going to start off with the skeletal system, your bones that are in your body, the 204 to 206 bones that are in your body. There's a little variability there because there can be 4 or 5 fused bones making up the coccyx or tailbone, for instance. So there is some variability, but generally it's 204, 200 to 206 bones in the human body. If you think about what they do, if we were in lecture right now, I would ask you to start thinking about that. What are some things that the bones of the body do for us? Well, my assumption now is that you're looking at your notes, so you can see the list there. So we'll go through that quickly. So functions of the skeletal system would include support and protect soft tissue and organs. For instance, if we take a look at the skull, actually I'll pull up an image from your textbook of the skull. Here's a look at the skull. Well, maybe I'll even choose another one here with a person's face on it. Here's the skull, and inside of the skull, of course, is the brain. Now, the brain we're going to talk about in the senses section, the last section in human biology, but it's covered by, it's many protective layers, but one of the main defenses for the brain against trauma, blunt force trauma, if you will, is this hard bony covering that we have called the skull. We also know that the skeletal system is the site of red blood cell production. It's stimulated or triggered by erythropoietin from the kidney, but that hormone actually acts on the bones, the long bones like femur, humerus, tibia, fibula, shoulder blade is another one. There's the bones that we talked about in the body that produce red blood cells. The bones are, of course, the sites of muscle attachment. Without bones, your muscles would not have anything to pull on, and you would not have movement. The last one is, or the fourth one I should say, is one that people don't often think as much about. Bones are also an important fat storage location. A little bit later we'll talk about, probably not today, next lecture, we'll talk about bone marrow. We've already talked about red marrow that produces blood cells, but there is also yellow marrow, and that's fat storage. That's, ladies and gentlemen, why dogs usually go after bones to chew on them. They're after that marrow, that wonderful high-calorie fat supply that they find in the middle of them. And there are people that eat marrow dishes. And again, that's a topic for another day. It's also an important source of calcium and phosphate. I already made the case. Calcium is important for bones, of course, to give them strength. Also important in heartbeat. Also important in blood clotting. And we're going to add to that list as we finish up this class. Phosphate is important because that's one of the key molecules in ATP. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the fuel that your body burns. Your body gets that phosphate in part from your skeletal system. So it's a reservoir, a reserve of both calcium and phosphate for all the important bodily functions. And then lastly on the list is permit flexible body movement. And so, you know, I'm gonna try this again, folks, see if the YouTube police get me or the video police get me. Just show you a couple of video clips of flexible body movement. Yeah, it's almost painful to watch this. This young lady's ability to move flexibly is incredible, and I'm not going to go through the whole of this, but dang, that hurts to watch. So just think, there's bones inside of that body that are allowing her to do that. Yeah, so we'll stop that one, and we'll go to another one. Incredible feats of strength. So if we look at this one, we can see some people doing some incredible things here. Standing on one hand, catches himself. We go back to another one, young lady being balanced by a young man, doing incredible things there. Just phenomenal. I'll do one more here. Well, there, what people are able to do because of our muscles and bones. Now, of course, these are well trained, but lurking inside of all of us is an ability to do similar things, at least in part. Some of us, it's lurking farther inside than others, but it's lurking nonetheless. All that due to the skeletal system. Well, let's consider bones then. Bones made of collagen and calcium phosphate. Collagen gives bones their flexibility. You've heard of collagen. It's an element that's advertised as being part of a shampoo. It's good for your skin. It's part of hair. We've talked about collagen with your circulatory system, with your vessels. It makes your arteries flexible so they can expand when a pulse of blood comes through after the heart beats. Collagen is a good thing, flexibility. Calcium phosphate is rigid, and it gives bones their strength. I have a picture of a calcium phosphate crystal. Okay, this is an electron micrograph of an actual calcium phosphate crystal. In geology, we would call that apatite. In the human body, calcium phosphate. That's the form it takes microscopically, of course, in your bones. If we look at the bone then, we want to consider its basic structure. So I'll start with this image from your textbook. So here we have a long bone. This looks like a humerus. And so there are different parts that we'll get to as we go through this section. But if we look at any given part of that bone, so here a piece of it, this little piece right here, is blown up right here in this image, and we can see these round structures in them. And so one of those round structures is blown up right here, and that structure is called an osteon, okay? And I'm going to switch now to another picture, a larger picture of that osteon. But I want you to have this in your mind so that you know when I'm talking about a bone, this is kind of the sequence that we're going to be looking at. So if we look at that osteon, the basic functional unit, the building block of a bone, and you can see how blood supply goes through the center of that osteon down here. Okay, we're going to zoom into this picture of an osteon. And this is an actual actual microscope slide of it. If we were able to have an actual lab, I would give you a bone slide, and you would look at it, and you would see this. This very good image. And this basic functional unit has some certain parts. So this whole round structure here is called an osteon. And this is produced by cells, bone cells, called osteoblasts, which are immature and become osteocytes as they mature. So just so you know what that might look like, this is an actual picture. It doesn't really help a lot, but osteoblasts are these cells that are lining along here. Osteocytes are these little ones here. They're living inside a little hole. And then there are osteoclasts. So this really isn't that helpful, but that's what they would look like to a pathologist, somebody that's looking at tissues. Okay, so this whole structure here is created by cells that live inside of these little dark dashes here. They're called lacunae. The holes, the black dashes are. They're actually openings in the bone. But they're little cells, bone cells, that live in there and sort of produce a collagen web that catches calcium phosphate from the blood supply. So the blood supply would be right here. And this is solid bone, except for these little sort of looks like spider leg passages that extend out from each of these lacunae and interconnect one lacunae with another lacunae with the central canal. So that the material is exchanged. So the blood supply is going to bring nutrients and take away waste. That blood supply would be right here. You can't see different arteries and veins in this slide, but there would be an artery and a vein in here. There's also going to be nerves. You know, it isn't too pleasant to break a bone, but anyway, arteries and veins. So the arteries are going to bring nutrients that are going to be carried down the canaliculi. That's that little spider-like leg thing. It's got kind of a neat name. Canaliculi to the lacunae. Kind of think of Lion King, like a Hakuna Matata, you know. Lacunae. Okay, that's the bone cell home. Okay, and so that bone cell will be supplied nutrients that way, and then it will get rid of waste down that same canaliculi to the veins here. And these other lacunae are connected either directly with the central canal or with other lacunae, so that waste and nutrients are constantly being transferred to and from the blood supply along those routes. It's very much like a coral reef, in a sense anyway. So if we go to a coral reef here, you know, I don't know if that's Mount Wanahakalugi or what, but you know, from what is it, Finding Nemo. Anyway, So you've got all multiple different kinds of coral here. But at the heart of any kind of coral is this little critter right here. That's actually a coral. And they produce this home around them. These are free-swimming little organisms, but they're colonial, so at some point they're going to form a colony, and they're going to spin a home around themselves and form these beautiful different types of coral that we associate with a coral reef. Similarly, the bone does that. Boy, that's kind of from a beautiful color image to black, mostly black and white. So we have this lacunae right here. Bone cell, the osteoblast. It's an immature bone cell because that osteoblast is in the process of making its home, if you will. So it's got a collagen web that it's spinning. I know a lot of spider analogies here, but you got to think that some of these look a lot like a spider, right? So anyway. Collagen web spinning, and it produces that web that catches calcium phosphate in it, and that the combination, the collagen is flexible, the calcium phosphate is solid, makes the hard bone that we see here forming the osteon. Okay, we would call that. So then really there's solid bone is a really bit of a misnomer because there are all these holes, these lacunae, there are all these little canals, canaliculi, all through that bone. But there is solid bone in here too, and we would call that solid bone around the lacunae and around the canaliculi matrix. And I'm Mr. Anderson. If you like watching the movie Matrix, maybe not. Anyway, osteoblasts live there until they've completed their job, and then they will transform into osteocytes. That's a mature bone cell, and its function changes from creating the bone around it, the matrix around it, to maintaining the matrix around it. So again, here are osteoblasts on either side of this opening here. There are osteocytes around the lacunae. The whitish area here would be a lacunae. The osteocyte would be the purplish things in the middle of it. And then we have this third item here called osteoclasts. And you see, there's a battle going on in your body all the time because osteoblasts and osteocytes are constantly building bone, but osteoclasts are constantly tearing your bone apart. You might say, well, why would you want a cell in your body that's going to tear it apart? Well, their job is you are created to have them, and their job is to break down bone. If you have, for instance, a sudden need for calcium, you've got to do some blood clotting. Your heartbeat requires it. A number of the other things that we're going to talk about require it. Nervous function, for instance, will require it. Your body will look in part to your skeletal system for that calcium. Also, if you have a sudden need for phosphate, you're working out really hard and your body's got to build more ATP, your body may look in part to the phosphate stored in your skeletal system. It's the osteoclast's job to break down bone to return or free that calcium and that phosphate into the blood supply for use elsewhere in the body. So osteoclasts, we're going to kind of cast them as the villain here, but they're really not. They're breaking down bone, yeah, but it's for a purpose if held in check, if held within bounds. So what's going on here? These osteoclasts are burrowing in, they're eating this bone away. These osteoblasts are coming along behind them, settling in the cavity made by the osteoclasts, creating new bone, and eventually filling that bone all in and converting to osteocytes. It's a constant battle between these three forces, if you will. The bone breakers and the bone makers. It is osteoclasts that actually also hollow out the marrow cavities that we'll talk about in the middle of your long bones and make place for yellow marrow to be stored, for red marrow to be. So they definitely have an important function. Now, I'm guessing you may have heard, pop's bad for you. Well, it's very acidic, that's true, and it can rot your teeth. It's sweet, some of it, and it can create a wonderful place for bacteria to live in your mouth. That's true, but boy, it tastes good, doesn't it? And sometimes you just need that caffeine kick. Well, it isn't the best, though. There are other downsides to pop, particularly if you like dark pop. Let's go to a can of Coke, for instance. Okay, here's the ingredients in a Coca-Cola can. Notice this one right here, phosphoric acid. Phosphoric acid has been shown to speed up the activity of osteoclasts. So your bones break apart or are torn apart more rapidly if you drink too much dark pop. You say, well, Coke, I don't like Coke, I like Pepsi. Okay? Oh, well, sorry folks, right there, phosphoric acid. Say Coke, Pepsi. I'm with Forrest Gump, though. I like my Dr. Pepper. Okay, so here we go, Dr. Pepper. Oh, sorry folks, it's got to be in there. Where we got it? Oh, there it is, phosphoric acid. Any dark pop. I've seen no dark pop that does not have phosphoric acid. I'm not sure what it does for dark pop, but it's there, unfortunately. So, yeah, not the best for you. Okay, little story for you. I'm going to go to a spot in Estes Park, Colorado, called Long's Peak. And this is the Narrows. This spot is 13,600 feet above sea level. There's a little spot back behind where this gentleman is that you would have come up the other side of the mountain, up a rock slide, and my brother and I were doing this climb one day. It's a 14,000 footer. I had lowlander's disease because I'm not from Colorado, so I was taking a big rest. And these people, there was 3 people, not this guy, but 3 other people, wanted to pass us because I was going so slow. So we, of course, let them go. But they were sitting then in the trail here, if you will, and we were kind of under a timeline. My brother was in grad school at Colorado College at the time, had to get up and down pretty quick. So we said, can we get by you folks, or are you guys going to take off, or can we get by you? Well, the 3 of them didn't want to wait for us again, so they stood up quick. That was the first problem. And one guy was wearing a wider pack frame than this, and they started walking. And I don't know if it was right here or not. It wasn't very far down the trail. But I remember looking up, and I watched this guy teeter off, and he fell off this cliff. Now, you can't see it here, but this is a 2,000-foot ride. And the man fell, no screaming, no dramatic Hollywood music. He fell, he cartwheeled off it, and his jaw hit the rock face about 10 or 15 feet down. I think it knocked him out. And he continued to fall about, I'm thinking about 35 feet. And there was a little rock ledge, not much bigger than our lab tabletop, and he flopped onto that, kept him from going the whole 2,000 feet, but still he fell 35 feet. I looked down over the edge at him, and he was laying there unconscious, and there was this rapidly expanding pool of blood coming out of his mouth, and I thought he was dead. So my brother and I, right after the shock of the whole situation, we said, we'll go get help. So we turned around and ran the other way. This guy was blessed. I don't know if he knows how blessed he was, but the other 2 people with him, one of them was a professional, was a technical climber and had the ability to get down to him. The other was a nurse. My brother and I turned and went down the mountain. Nobody would go on, we were going fast and ran out of breath and wanted to catch somebody to tell them, go on ahead of us down the mountain, get help. But nobody would. They all wanted to go up see the dead guy. So my brother and I, we had to go 2 hours down the mountain. We kind of finally contacted a ranger. He had to go back up the mountain, confirm that somebody had actually fallen. They called a helicopter in, but the helicopter couldn't get close enough against this rock face to get to the guy. So the guy spent the night there. It was already in the afternoon. We were there. The next morning, they lowered him in a basket over the side. He had a broken jaw, broken ribs, broken arm, broken leg, broken pelvis, and internal injuries, but he did actually survive. Wow. And he was probably in his mid-30s, something like that, I'm guessing. So yeah, no. Remember that. About the same distance, another day, when I was in grad school, I was doing contractor work, and I was rehabbing this apartment building at 2621 3rd Avenue South in Minneapolis. And we heard a shriek. And these are 3rd floor windows, and a lady it was actually the side apartment here, but she had her kitchen table up overlooking out the window, and her 18-month-old, two-year-old, something like that, crawled up on the chair, up on the table, looked out the window, and fell down onto concrete down here. Not too dissimilar of a distance from the gentleman I just mentioned on Long's Peak. There was a shriek. We ran down for help, called the ambulance, carted the little one away, went to the hospital. That baby was just fine. Just very few bruises. What's the difference between the guy that fell off Long's Peak and got all broken up and the baby that fell a similar distance and really didn't suffer terrible injury at all despite the traumatic situation. Well, that's because older bone, as we grow, more calcium, it accumulates more calcium phosphate, it becomes harder and more brittle. And babies' bones are softer and pliable. If you've ever held a baby, you'll notice, well, one thing, you can check out kneecaps. When they're really little, they don't have a kneecap. Their skull, I don't want you pushing on their skulls, but their skulls are soft. They have soft spots on them yet that have to harden as they age. So they harden, and of course, the extreme case, in very old age, those bones get really, really hard. Interestingly enough, pediatricians looking at broken bone incidents in children are concerned. In a report from pediatricians, they are actually disturbed by the decreasing number of broken bones in children in this day and age. Yeah, I said that right. Pediatricians want to see more broken bones in children. And here's why. Not because they're sadistic, but because it indicates that children are active. And active children do unfortunately break their bones, but they're active. And it is that activity that makes bones stronger and thicker and heavier and better. I'll tell you another little story here about a gentleman that pitched for the Dodgers and I think the Brewers, Don Sutton. Anyway, when the Twins were first in the World Series back in the 60s, this is one of the guys that helped defeat them, but he was a really good pitcher. And if you look at the torque on a pitcher's arm here as they're throwing the ball, there's a lot of torque there, okay? And then this is Don Sutton now, aged a little bit. He's still looking pretty good. That first picture was from the early middle 1960s. They did a study of his arm. Okay, he's a left-hander. I think he's a left-hander. Is he a left-hander? He's a right-hander. Sorry. They did a bone scan of his throwing arm. That's what I wanted to emphasize on. They found that just the act of throwing a ball caused the bone in his right arm to be 3 times denser than the bone in his non-throwing left arm. Think about that. He's not lifting, he's not pounding pavement. Just that act of throwing makes bone denser and better. So anyway, that whole process of bone removal and replacement carried on, as we saw and talked about in this picture here, is controlled by hormones and is affected by available calcium. The 2 main hormones, if you look at your notes there, are estrogen and parathyroid hormone. Estrogen, we always associate that with women, but men produce it too. Both men and women produce parathyroid hormone. Both of those hormones are activated by calcitriol. Now remember, we very briefly mentioned calcitriol at the start of the semester. But I do think you'll remember the Russian school children standing in front of the bright light. And the fact that if we live above 40 degrees north latitude, we don't get enough sunlight. The deal is, sunlight, if you remember, turns a form of cholesterol in your skin into vitamin D. Also made the case that's why vitamin D is added to milk. The vitamin D is changed by your liver and by your kidneys into calcitriol, which, along with estrogen and parathyroid hormone, affect the absorption and transport of calcium in the body. You got to have them functioning. You got to have all 3: estrogen, parathyroid hormone, calcitriol. Well, what happens, ladies, as you age? You produce less estrogen. You can talk to grandma and grandpa. No, just grandma, because grandpa won't be aware. Oh, grandpa will know. Older women produce less estrogen. Older women and men both produce less parathyroid hormone. When you're over 40, I know that seems like a long way away now, but it'll seem like a blink of an eye shortly. Osteoblasts slow down, but not osteoclasts. Now, if you remember, osteoblasts are the ones that actually make new bone. Osteoclasts are the ones that eat away at the bone, remove bone. Well, 40-plus women lose, it's estimated, 8% of bone mass per decade. That should be, you need to be aware of that, okay? That's why you need to stay active. You will reduce that number if you stay active. 40-plus men lose 3% per decade. And men have more skeletal mass to begin with, so this is more of an issue with women. Not men are not excluded, but ladies, you need to be more aware of this. You need to be active. You need to have a good diet. You need to get your calcium. You need to get your sunlight. and this is some reason why. If you don't, osteoporosis will develop, and that's what the last topic we'll deal with today. This is what osteoporosis can look like. This is normal bone. There are normally holes all through your bone. We'll show you what that looks like next time. But this is how the density of bone deteriorates or diminishes with osteoporosis. Well, you might say, well, those are two images, and any older woman's body doesn't normally just automatically go from normal to osteoporotic. But it's a gradation. It's a continuum. It tends from this normal condition to this osteoporotic condition over time. Well, how do you know when you're there? Well, osteoporosis is defined as a loss of bone mass that affects function. When the elderly lady, has difficulty with movements, or I'll show you here. Well, that's an artist's rendition of what the difference might look like. Okay, here we go. Okay, so as this lady has aged, notice how she becomes more stooped over. Well, what's going on? What's causing that? Well, here's a look at a woman at age 50 and age 75. You can see how she has changed by her posture. Well, this is what's going on. Vertebrae are collapsing. They're crush fracturing. Sounds painful, doesn't it? But it can sneak up on people. Here's an X-ray of it. Okay, so of course you've got the issues with the nerves that are coming out of that vertebrae, out of that spinal column all through there. That's going to potentially create problems with sensation and movement. But there are other issues as well. You notice this lady here, as she's stooped over, all her organs in here are becoming compressed because of her posture. Breathing is going to become more difficult. When she can't take a deep breath as well, then she's not going to purge air out of her lungs as well. Makes her more susceptible for things like pneumonia and all other conditions that go along with that we talked about with the last section. So this osteoporosis is an issue that doesn't just affect the nerves that come out of the spine, but all the organs of the abdominal and thoracic cavity can be affected as well. Okay, we're going to stop there and pick it up with how bones actually grow. We'll look a little more closely at that process next time. Thank you very much.